Hello, friends, and welcome back to Ghouls Night In, the spooky chat show with your best ghoul friends. I'm Penny Snark,
And I'm Midge Munster.
and the people want to know about Nosferatu,
The
Midge.
people have spoken.
The people have spoken. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it came out at like such because it came out on Christmas. Like we had to record like all of our year in review stuff before it came out and stuff like
Right.
that. So I should have known that we would probably need to talk about it on the show and that people would want to know what we think. But for some reason I was still like, I don't know, maybe we won't. But of course, now that we've both seen it, we're like, no, we have to talk about this.
Yeah. I have so many feelings and nowhere to put them except this podcast. So,
Yes, here it is. Yes. This is going to be a full spoiler episode. So
mhm.
if you have not seen the new Nosferatu and you do not want plot elements spoiled from it, go turn this off and get in your car and drive to your local cinema and go
Yeah.
watch it.
Get
And
the
then
get the heck out of here.
get the heck out of here, then get back in your car and immediately hit play and
Yeah.
continue this episode. Uh, all right. Uh, so, for those of you who do not, I mean, how do you not remember? But honestly, the whole last few weeks are a blur. Who knows what's going on?
Yeah,
Uh,
we're in that fun limbo space where time is non-existent.
It
So,
is, yes. So if you have not listened to the episode Midge did about the original Nosferatu, the 1922 version, highly recommend listening to that first. I'm sure we will be referring to that a lot
mhm.
because this is a very a faithful in some ways and a remake, a reimagining in other ways. But you know what? We are going to jump into it. And I think one of the things that Midge and I talked about when we were deciding to do this episode is just wanting to kind of set the scene a little bit with talking about Eggers as a director, just because
Yeah.
I feel like this movie is very much it's very much a continuation of his work so far, in my
Mhm.
opinion. Uh,
I
and I
don't
think
remember. Is this? Are you? Am I a Nikki fan? Are you? Are you like an Eggers like loyalist, or do you have any strong opinions about him as a director in general?
Yeah, I would say so. Before Nosferatu, I had only seen The Witch,
Okay,
but as we will talk about this, Nosferatu is only his fourth feature film.
right,
So
right,
there's not a whole lot to have to
yeah.
see. I did after Nosferatu watch The Lighthouse,
That's
and
literally my plan for later today. I've been like
I
saving it for
watched
this
it
snowstorm.
yesterday.
Amazing.
So I yeah, so cards on the table. I will say that I generally do like his directing style. There are things that I think he's really strong with and things I think that he's less strong with, but like
Hmm.
overall I enjoy the product that he produces, I would
Yeah,
say.
I would agree with that statement. I think I'm almost I liked a lot of elements about The Witch, but I'm actually kind of a witch hater, which
Okay.
is like a very unpopular opinion, I know. But I definitely have I was excited. I feel like he found his footing a bit in Nosferatu, and I'm excited to see like what comes post this because I feel like this was where I was like, oh, now he knows what he's about.
Yeah. Yeah. So we will just say, going back to the very beginning, the most important thing is Robert Eggers is a confirmed vampire freak boy. He is truly just like us.
One of us,
One
one
of
of
us.
us.
I'll get my sources out of the way quick because I'm going to kind of talk from variety of these. I really enjoyed Antonia Blythe did an interview for interviewed him as well as members of the cast for Deadline. Highly recommend reading this article. I'm going to be quoting and summarizing it for a lot, but it's a really fascinating article with a lot of details that we won't get into. Um, And then I also went back to read some other articles that came out around the time of his other releases. So I read a New Yorker article called "Robert Eggers' Historical Visions Go Mainstream," and a Format article called "Designer Turned Director Robert Eggers Discusses His Film The Witch." So in these kind of various interviews, it actually comes Nosferatu comes up a lot. Because as you know, Midge, we love to talk about childhood Halloween costumes on
Yes.
this show, and
I'm obsessed with this whole backstory. I can't wait to get
yes,
into
it's
it.
so good. So Eggers dressed up as Dracula when he was 8 years old for
It's
Halloween.
it's very much
Um,
giving Guillermo, like, this
right?
whole story, I was like, "Aw."
I know. So he was already in vampire mode when the next year at age 9 he saw the original 1922 Nosferatu, completely silent, no score or anything. So you may recall from Midge's episode that Nosferatu was ordered to be destroyed because it
Mhm.
ripped off Dracula. So at this time, there were only bootleg copies circulating around before in recent years there has been, restoration work done on the film. And he speaks in this Deadline interview about how it really felt even more realistic because it was like so grainy and like you couldn't tell that like
It's
where like the makeup or the bald cap and stuff were. And he just
like
felt like,
vampire found
yeah,
footage.
it was like vampire found footage and he was
Yeah.
fascinated. Um, and he famously, in high school, teamed up with a classmate named Ashley Kelly Tata, who is now also an accomplished director. And for a senior project, they put on a shot by shot, screen accurate theatrical staging of the silent film Nosferatu,
Yeah.
which is some wild ass theater kid shit that I respect so much.
Yeah, I did something very similar with Doctor Horrible's sing-along blog.
An
Uh,
equally important piece of cinema.
so yeah, fine cinema, literature, yeah.
Yes, literature.
But I was like, "Oh, I know this kid. I've been this kid."
Right. Yes. And it was actually because of doing this high school theater production, a someone who was involved in local theater in the area was like, hey, do you guys want to come and do a version of this in the theater? And it was really this doing this play that made him realize he wanted to direct and create theater. And obviously there was also this deep connection to film, and not just to vampires but to Nosferatu specifically, which I think is
Very
um,
cool.
pretty cool.
Am I crazy? It was a musical also, right? When they produced
Was
it at
it?
full scale? I believe so.
Oh man.
If I'm
I,
not mistaken, they, like, made a score and it was a musical. Let me
oh gosh.
I'll fact check myself as you continue, but
All right. Yes. Yeah. So he goes on to study design and directing, get started working in experimental and street theater, and just kind of talks about working as a designer for theaters or commercials or kind of whatever he can get his hands on in order to fund, these directing projects. And as we mentioned, The Witch is his first feature length film, which is so wild to me because I feel like even in this movie, you can see so clearly like what his perspective as a director is.
oh, for sure. The
Um,
tone and the style is what that's gonna sound bad. One of the only things I actually liked about that movie. I had a lot of problems with the story, but
yeah.
I loved the overall vibe and the pacing of the piece, which is definitely his signature.
Yes, yes. His signature is definitely like these, it's very detailed. The Witch is famously shot with only natural light and real candlelight in indoor scenes. So it's naturalistic, but also deals with themes of the supernatural, I would
Yeah.
say is kind of a hallmark of his work. Uh,
Mhm.
so The Witch premieres at Sundance in 2015, which is in late January, and is immediately like people are obsessed.
Mhm.
before The Witch even has its theatrical release, it is announced in July 2015 that he is going to be making Nosferatu next. Um,
Yes.
yeah,
Yep.
which is crazy. And there's even, I love, like, the quote from him at the time is basically being like, it seems pretty wild for me to do Nosferatu as my second film.
Right, right.
Which
And they're like, "Well, bud, I got news for you."
yes. So that does not end up working out. That falls through. And he goes on to make The Lighthouse and The Northman. And then finally, it is time for Nosferatu to come along. And so I'm actually going to just read this quote from him that was in this Deadline interview, because I think that it really speaks to kind of like the perspective that he brought to the film to kind
Yeah.
of like bring us into this. So he says, vampirism in Dracula is the thing I've been thinking about and looking at for a long time. I had read Montague Summers, who is like a scholar who writes about the occult, as a teenager, and many other authors of vampire lore, but I think until I set out to make Nosferatu, I was still too contaminated by the cinematic tropes. You're infusing the
Mm.
things you're reading with cinematic tropes that aren't there. In doing the research to write the script, I needed to be disciplined to forget what I knew. And then you start looking at early vampire accounts and you're like, they're not even drinking blood. They're just strangulating people or suffocating people or fucking them to death. And that was really interesting. So excellent quote all around.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
But I think that this is really so actually we haven't even said I I really like Nosferatu, the film that Eggers
Oh,
made. Uh,
yeah. Yeah, this is gonna be like there's no haters here. If you came here for, like, Penny to hate something today, it's not gonna happen.
I have a few adjustments I would make,
Sure,
but
sure, but yeah.
overall, yes, I very much enjoyed this film, and I feel like part of so I'm like partially some people might not like it because they do not like his style, and that is totally fair. It's a very specific style. You
Yeah.
don't have to like it. But I feel like a lot of the kind of surprised reactions we're getting from people really comes back to this and this idea that he's purposefully setting aside the cinematic vampire tropes that we are
Yes.
used to really go back to like straight folklore. And I was so excited after we had just done our vampire folklore episode
I
to see
know.
so much of this coming through in the movie. And it really does, like, my instinct and what I really liked about this film is I feel like it feels more like a fable or a folk story than it ever has been
Absolutely.
presented before.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm sure we'll get more into this, but, like, yeah, my biggest problem leaving this movie has been just, like, people's dedication to misunderstanding what he was doing.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm like, it's totally fine if you didn't
If it's not
like
for
it, if
you,
you didn't
right,
vibe with it, but
but that doesn't make it a bad film.
yeah, I don't think you can say that he wasn't successful at creating the
Right,
film he was aiming to create.
right, especially, like, the level of research and things that went into it, arguably more than probably any vampire film in recent history. Um, People just dismissing this from vampire, like, cinematic universe
Yeah,
is making me very angry.
I know, me
I'm gonna
too.
unleash a plague of 1,000 rats on you.
Right?
Mm.
Yeah, you guys need to get there needs to be some rats running around. Yeah, I also feel so this it's hard to say this without sounding pretentious, but I feel like a lot of people went into this not knowing what Nosferatu is.
Absolutely.
Like I have definitely seen people being like, this is basically just
This
Dracula.
is
And I'm like,
exactly like
yep,
Dracula.
yes it is. It
Yeah.
sure is, you
You
guys.
might say exactly like Dracula.
Right? Oh my
You might
gosh.
even say unauthorized.
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know, like so the film is just really beautifully done. And like we've kind of talked about, he's famous for this very specific style of shooting, which was really interesting to read about. He really meticulously storyboards like every shot. It sounds like
Mhm.
basically like doing an animation, and like sets up the camera and is like, the camera is staying right here. They don't use second cameras generally. And then you kind of get placed. It was interesting. Willem Dafoe was talking about it in one of these interviews, and was saying that it's kind of a unique challenge as an actor, because you're being put into like this tableau that's
Yeah,
been
and
very
you're
specifically.
inside it.
Yes, you are inside it. It's blocked out. You are kind of like, the actors are sort of like dolls who are being placed into this scene, and you act within it, but it's not like it sounds like, you would usually have like a more fluid kind of acting performance
It's
in,
honestly
a
very
movie, but
theatrical. They're
it
being
is.
put in proscenium more
Exactly.
or less to be like, "Okay, set the scene and go."
Yeah, and that really is, it's a unique style, but I feel like it really works well, especially with this kind of like folklore
With a fable.
presentation.
Yeah.
I felt
Mhm.
almost like it was going through like a horrifying like pop-up picture book.
I was literally gonna say it kind of makes you feel like you're looking into a book at it or something, yeah. Yeah, I'm sure you're gonna get into all this too, but the level of, like, constructing all the city street shots on a lot and thing because he wants those abilities to, like, tweak the smallest details,
Yes.
um, and again, you mentioned this about the witch, but it's like any of the candle scenes, any of the flame scenes, like that's all happening in real time. He's using actual fire to light the scenes and not using artificial light. Like
Yes.
that's crazy.
It's so
Nobody's
crazy.
doing that. Nobody's doing that anymore.
Yes, it
And
looks so good.
it's so beautiful and there's something just so like you know, Penny, you know when you eat soup
Uh-huh. I have eaten soup.
and you have that primal, you're like, "Oh, how long have people been eating soup?" Just that, like, that caveman prep. That's how I feel when I watch this movie. I'm like, "Oh, remember when people used to make films?
Yes.
Remember
So
when people
true.
used to really get in there and make a movie?"
Yes. Oh my god. Yeah, like it's it's so intricately crafted that I'm
Yeah,
like,
art.
you're it's art. You're always like, "Ah, yes, I'm here experiencing this art piece." And the performances were so good. I have to shout
Oh,
out like some so we will say that originally Anya Taylor-Joy from The Witch was attached to this when he was initially going to be doing it, and
mhm.
I'm sure she would have done a lovely job. She's great, but I thought Lily Rose Depp did such an amazing
I was
job,
gonna
which
say, but
I
hot
did
damn Lily
not
Rose Depp.
expect. I'm sorry to you, Ms. Depp,
Yeah.
but
Well,
she
I
did
just had
such
no
a good
idea
job.
what to expect from her. I haven't seen her in anything previously. I didn't know really anything about her except her lineage.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I had heard some uh not so kind
mm,
views on past performances,
okay.
but I have generally seen people being like, "Oh, I think that that was like, we see now that that was probably the director's
More
fault."
about the
That
director of the script
yeah,
than her.
that's
Yeah.
it was, that the best performance was not pulled from her in previous things. And as I'm sure you know, Midge, Harry Styles was almost Thomas.
Yeah. Well,
He
there
dropped
was
out like right before filming.
have you seen this interview with Bill Skarsgård that when they were gonna do this 10 years ago, Bill Skarsgård was supposed to be Thomas?
Yes, that too.
Yeah, and then they, like, read him for oh my gosh, Aaron Taylor Johnson's role.
Friedrich.
Friedrich, thank you. Yeah, read him for Friedrich, and we're like, "We don't think you're right for that." And then, yeah,
They're
ended
like,
up
"Would you like to
being
be a big monster boy?" And he was
well,
like, "Oh,
I
wait."
I love that interview. He says that Edgar said, "What about Orlok?" And Bill went, "What about Orlok?"
What about Orlok? Oh my god, I love it. Yeah, I in one of these interviews, he was talking about, like, the first time that they put him into the prosthetics, and he was like, "This doesn't even look
Look
like
like
me.
me. Yeah,
Like,
he's
it
like,
doesn't
"Where
even
am I
look
in
like
there?"
me once I was older." And Eggers was like, "Yes,
Right.
that's the goal."
I love
And
that we're kind of in real time seeing the, like, Doug Jonesification of Bill
yes,
Skarsgård.
very much so.
Um, because you know what? People have a lot to say, and I don't hear any of it. I was impressed.
I was into it.
I was impressed. I think that level of dedication, A, to just working in a suit like that, like
Yes.
we all know how challenging that is for actors because Doug Jones has talked extensively, Jim Carrey talked extensively
Mhm,
about it. Like that level of prosthetics is a hell of a lot of work from the get-go,
mhm.
and then completely altering your voice, your mannerisms. Like I think he really showed out. I do. And I'm
Yeah.
not like I'm not I've never been on the Bill Skarsgård train. Like, I feel like a lot of
Yeah. Yeah,
the
like,
spooky girlies are like,
I like
"Ooh,
him, but I
daddy."
he's not one of my one of my special boys.
It's not what now Nicholas Hoult
I
has
was
been one
gonna
of
say,
my
in
special
contrast,
boys.
Nicholas Hoult is one of my special boys, and
Yes,
I'm
since his
so glad that
Warm Bodies days, I have been on the
yes,
Nicholas Hoult
yes.
train. Yes. Um,
And he did such a good job. He was
what a little scream queen.
such a little scream queen, and, like, okay, we're now kind of we're whatever. You guys know how Midge and I do. We're just gonna be taking a fun little
A
wibbly
detour.
wobbly adventure through this
We're going
movie.
Jeremy Bearimy on this one, yeah.
Yes, we are. But I really enjoyed the relationship between Thomas and Ellen in this film, and I feel
Yes.
like it did a better job than a lot of Dracula adaptations in
Mhm.
general of showing the, like, real love and connection between these people in a way that makes me be like, "Oh, yes, like, this is a relationship that is worth fighting for,
Yes.
and, like, it's tragic that it has
It
been
gives
rent
the
apart
story
in this
stakes.
way."
Yeah,
Yes.
it gives it actual stakes, and it makes you feel heartbroken for him and for Ellen.
Mhm.
Um, because we're on the topic, I'm gonna stand on my soapbox for a second.
Please go ahead.
Um, that is so I've mentioned previously now in this episode that I was not a fan of The Witch.
Yes.
I have become more of a fan of it as I've talked to people who really love the film and tried to understand their perspective about it. But one thing I did not particularly love, especially as a film written and directed by a man, love Robert Eggers, think he's doing great work, but at the end of the day, that's a white man.
Yep.
Um, I didn't love. I understood why we were telling the story of a woman in that time period who was literally given no options, right?
Yeah.
Like the horror of that story is really that at the end of the day, even her option that quote like saved her was still thrust upon her in a way that wasn't
Mhm.
her choice. She had no choices. Um which again, there's power in understanding that story, but also I'm like, baby, that's being a woman.
Yeah, for
If
sure.
I want somebody to tell me about how scary it is to be a woman, I will just wake up in the morning.
Truly.
Like, so I felt weird about the way that story was shared. Whereas in contrast, what I really liked about Nosferatu was that Ellen had agency from
Yes.
the get-go. Like, yes, Nosferatu is a predator. Like, yes, he is pursuing her. However, the way that we reworked Ellen's story in this adaptation gives her complete agency over her story, in my opinion.
Mhm.
I know
Yeah.
there's a lot of discourse online that would disagree with me right now.
Sure, sure, yeah, and I mean, themes are open for people to
Of
interpret
course.
as they
Mhm.
will. I agree, and I really liked, that this film centers Ellen so much, like
Absolutely. Because she's the like, she's the reason. And
yeah,
there's a lot of people online being like, "Well, I thought it wasn't very feminist that she died at the end." I was like, "That's baby, I'm gonna tell you something. That's the point of the movie.
yeah,
The point
yeah,
from the get-go, even in the original, is that Ellen is marked for death. In this adaptation, she gets to choose
yes,
to be the one who saves everybody." Like,
yeah,
she
yeah,
gets to, because she could have just been like, yeah, I'm gonna keep minding my business. Like, I'm gonna let my husband die. I'm gonna kiss this vampire. Like, she could have done something else.
It is. And it is also like this is another thing where I'm like, that is the plot of Nosferatu, is that a woman has to trick the vampire like into staying, and it's done differently in different adaptations. And I felt like this, like you said, is the first time that like she is like, no, I am deciding to do this. Like I'm getting my man out of the way and I
Yeah. Well, and that
am the one who has to undertake this.
her purity, because like that's the story of a woman and a vampire, right? It's always that the like the purity or the virginity or whatever of the maiden
Mhm.
is the antithesis to the sin, to the rot, to the whatever of the vampire, to the soullessness of
Mhm.
the predator. Um, but this was the first time I feel like I saw that purity almost like weaponized. It was her weapon.
Mhm. Yes.
It wasn't her crux to bear. Like, it was that she got to weaponize that. The scene where Willem Dafoe's character is talking to her on the steps and is like, in another
Yes.
life you might have been a like a high priestess.
Mhm.
And I'm like, damn boy, you're so right. Like,
So true, bestie.
but just that, I mean, really, that sentiment of like, women are just viewed so differently depending on the situation they are put in, and
Yep,
these
yep.
gifts or curses or whatever you want to see them as can be viewed so differently just depending on your external scenario. And
Mhm. Yeah.
that's what I loved, is that because she had this gift or curse, like, she got to wield it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I really liked the decision to have her be like this, have this connection to the occult, and like something
Mhm.
that has been with her whole life. She has these visions, she has like kind of these abilities, and that allows her to be more active in it instead of just kind of like being cast along with like the waves of the story. And it
Mhm.
also, so I know, so I feel like this version adds a lot of plot details and a
Definitely.
lot of
Yeah.
like
Expands a
explanations of
lot.
things. And I will say I think some of that is successful, some of that I think is a little bit too much.
I
And
agree. Yeah.
I so that's kind of my only like, and it's funny because I'm like most of Eggers work that I've seen so far, I'm like nothing happens in this movie, and in Nosferatu everything happens
Everything happens,
in this
right.
movie, and so I think we need to we
This
can
club has
calibrate to a
everything.
little. This club has everything. We can get to a little bit of a middle ground with that, but I do like the occultism. I think is an explanation and a facet that was really useful in
Mhm.
kind of defining this, especially because in so many like adaptations either of Nosferatu or of even Dracula, it's like so Dracula just like sees this girl's picture or
And
like
becomes
sniffs
obsessed, right?
her on
Well, or
Jonathan slash Thomas's whatever and is like, ooh, I gotta do this. So I really liked that like the initial connection is between
between her,
Orlok and
yeah, it's
Ellen.
not
Yeah.
tertiary to the I I did miss, the line from the original film, "Your wife has a lovely neck." My favorite Orlok
Yes.
moment. What a
Classic.
freaking weird ass thing to say, bro. Classic
Such
vampire nonsense.
truly just like nice neck, baby. There, although you, so we didn't get it from Orlok, although we did get like the weird vibes from Thomas's boss, who's just like, "Yeah, your wife's a real hottie, huh?" And he's kind of like,
Right. Yeah, what did
what?"
he's like, she's like, what did he
He said
say?
he's
Virtuous or something?
sylph-like. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. He was, yeah, he also, though, great actor. Wow.
Yes,
Unsung
excellent,
hero in this cast. His
so
all of
good.
his scenes were mwah, so creepy and spooky and delightful. I'm gonna make one final casting thing because
Yeah,
I feel us starting to get more into plot and
totally.
details, but I'm gonna say that I could have absolutely done without Aaron Taylor Johnson in this film. He
Yeah.
was acting in a completely different movie than everyone else on that screen. I don't know what script he got, but he was like doing the most. He was doing pure camp, and I was completely uninterested in it except his last scene. I thought his last scene was compelling, but it was too late
Yeah.
by then.
Yeah, yeah, I wasn't super in love with kind of that, and that even the character, like, I saw, who was it? It was someone on TikTok, I'm sorry to that person, but talking about kind of, like, the themes of, like, wealth and kind of, like, men's fixation on wealth
Sure.
in the film, I think was useful, so I see why we had, this guy, but I'm just like, "How about more sapphic scenes with your girlfriend?"
How about yeah, how about more, of Emma Corrin on screen
Yes,
100%
she
of the
was so
time?
good.
Yeah, really, really loved Emma as Anna. Thought that was a
Yes.
very and I liked that we got to explore their friendship, and I liked Anna's character having this element of being, like, a very spiritual like, a religious person,
Mhm.
and then having to choose to support her friend, like, over her faith, I thought was
Yeah.
a really interesting, like, female dynamic, and I liked that a lot. Um, yeah, man. What else? There's so much good here.
There's so much
I
good
have
here.
so
Well,
much more to say.
since we've been talking about Ellen and Anna, we gotta shout out the incredible costumes,
Hell yeah.
done by Linda Muir. And I read an interview with her on the art of costuming where she specifically sought out like German fashion plates and
Yes.
magazines of the time so that it was very rooted in the period and the place. She talks in this interview about how she made detachable sleeves for one of Ellen's dresses because that was a thing at the time that you would have like different sleeves so that you could like wear things for like evening versus day.
Mm.
And although they didn't show the dress with that in the film, you can see them in the background. So I'm gonna have to look for that
Oh, that's
um,
cool.
on a separate one. She says they're like draped over a chair. I really loved seeing. I was like, Ellen, outfit repeater, we stan. Like
Yeah,
you see her in the same dresses, which would be,
with
historically
her yeah,
accurate for her
for her
as
social class.
a
Yeah.
person who has married down, and is, with her lovely little poor church mouse.
I also was looking at some interviews with the costumer, and she was talking about, even just, like, the difference in corsetry to show wealth, that
Yes.
Ellen's corset is a self-lacing because she would not have had like, maids or servants to help
I know.
her.
Oh my god, when they showed the corset, and I was like, "That shit's fan laced."
Yeah.
I was like, "Hell yeah, she's got fan laced corset," and
Yes.
just yeah, the way, and in specifically, obviously, in some of her like nighttime freak out scenes and stuff, just this sense of like the urge of men to control women's bodies, and
Mhm.
everyone being like, she's hysterical, tighten her
Tighten
corset,
her corset, yeah.
and just how the clothes become part of the character and part of the story, I thought was really well done here. And the fact that when we see Orlok, he is not dressed as someone in this time. They were talking about driving, getting inspiration from the 1520s for him because he's
Mhm.
300 years old and he's still wearing his ratty ass coat from 300 years
Yeah.
ago.
I absolutely adored I gasped out loud when I saw his design
Yeah.
on the screen, and I talked to somebody else about this that we were like, because as we all know, the mustache has been a point of contention for a lot
Truly.
of people. I've seen people say the words, and I quote, "The mustache ruined the movie for me."
Wow.
And I said, and I quote, "Are you an idiot?" Um, I have a lot of strong feelings about this film, y'all. I'm so sorry. Um, no, literally, when I saw his mustache, I said, "Vlad." I whispered
Yes.
Vlad out loud in the theater like an excited child seeing Santa Claus. I I was so excited by that choice.
Right. I was like, I'm like, do I Penny Snark, a woman in 2025, love the mustache?
No,
I do not. Is it the correct choice? Yes. It is the
absolutely.
correct mustache. And even, I mean, obviously the Vlad of it all, but in Dracula, he is described as having a long
He
white
does have a
mustache.
mustache in the novel.
So
Yep.
he's got the mustache is canon, you guys.
Yeah.
Like, you can't argue with the
Oh,
mustache.
the media literacy or lack thereof is infuriating me. Like this is my hill I'm gonna die on.
Yeah,
This
that's
is where my neurodivergency fully kicks off, and I'm gonna fight people online about Dracula.
I know. This is one of the hard things where it is like I totally understand why someone wouldn't like this movie, but most of the people that I see online don't have good reasons for not liking the
Right,
movie.
it's one like
I'm
we
like, "The
said.
reason you don't like it is not correct, I'm sorry."
Right, right. Like we said, it's totally fine if you just are like, "Oh, that wasn't for me." But to come out and be like, "This is a bad movie," when you have no context for the history of the film is infuriating to me.
Yes.
But yeah, loved his design. Um, I also saw something really interesting about so when Thomas is in the village just outside of the
Mhm.
castle when he's with the Romani people, um he like steals a coat from one of the
Yeah.
stable hands, and the costumer mentioned that they bought that coat, they like saw it online, like, it's a vintage coat,
Yes.
and they saw it and were like, oh, that looks, correct. Like that looks like
Mhm.
it's right, so they bought it and bought like embellished it, and then later through either something that they found inside like the like markings in the coat, or I don't know. But anyway, they figured out it was actually a Transylvanian garment from the correct period, and like they didn't necessarily. I mean, they knew it looked right, but they didn't know what it was
Yeah, it
going
didn't
in.
have, like, the full provenance.
Yeah, and I was like, that's freaking cool.
It's so cool. Yeah, you can just like it's so meticulous, like you can tell. But and also so something else that I loved about this film is that it is not just like dark and angsty all the way through. Like there
Yeah,
are
lots of pretty
definitely real
coloring.
moments of humor and of lightness.
Oh well,
Um
Willem Dafoe,
I was gonna say Willem Dafoe is a delight the whole
just a
time.
giddy little like
Which
rodent man.
he always is, but especially I feel like in this film, and I don't know if you know this, Midge, but he is from Wisconsin and he went to the
Oh, of
University of
course.
Milwaukee. So
I did not, but that makes perfect
we
sense.
definitely have some claim. So very proud of what an awesome weird little man he is. And he's so good in this movie. Also, the biggest I will say the biggest laugh line in my theater was when Knock bites the head off the bird in the asylum,
Uh huh.
and Dr. Severs is like, "Why would you do that, my good fellow?"
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone cracked up, and it was just it's nice to have like kind of moments of levity in a
Yeah.
very like intense movie, and so I definitely appreciated that.
Yes, and, I thought that he played, which I think that's also just Willem Dafoe, though. I don't think he's
Yes.
making a choice. I think that's
No,
him,
yeah.
and I think that's exactly why Robert Eggers keeps using him, is because, like, he has this natural whimsy, even though he's
Mhm.
kind of a scary-looking individual. He has just this playfulness about him that is so endearing, and I think, like, where Aaron Taylor Johnson was bothering me with his camp, like, Willem Dafoe was camp, but in a way that made sense within the world of the movie.
Yeah, and I mean, it makes sense for that character to
Right,
be
because he's
camp.
like an
It
occultist, yeah,
Yeah, he's a wacky occultist. It doesn't really make as much sense
for
for,
this
like,
posh
the
rich guy to be.
stuffy husband to be kinda campy.
Well, I was like, "Are we doing Tartuffe? Like, what's" he was playing it, like, very, like, "Oh, I'm rich." I was like,
Yeah.
"Stop, I get it." Uh, but yeah, no, Willem Dafoe and his love of rodents really made my
Yes.
day.
Oh my gosh, I love just every interview of him being so excited about working with rats.
So
So
many rats
good.
too. So many
So many
real live
rats.
rats.
Real live rats hanging out, doing rat stuff. And oh, so this is something else. Oh, I forgot I was going to say this earlier in the beginning,
That's
but I
okay.
didn't. Something I enjoyed was Eggers also talked about like taking inspiration specifically from the screenplay for
Mm,
Nosferatu and not even the actual version. Because famously in the 1922 and then again in the Werner Herzog version, like the ship comes, sailing silently into the
The horrible.
town
Yeah.
being full of stuff. But it is in the original Nosferatu screenplay that there's like a crazy storm.
Mhm.
And so I was kind of like, ooh, I now in modern times, I can kind of put that back into this, which I thought was very cool to kind of be able to even expand on things that maybe were part of the original intention for
Yes.
the film that was not able to be done with the budget and the cinematic technology of the time.
Right. Yeah, and I really appreciated the well, 2 things. Going back to the original film, um, that he kept the, like, long face shots on so many of these
Yes.
pieces, like, so many scenes, especially with Lily Rose Depp and with Nicholas Hoult too, like, when he's terrified, just these long, drawn out close-up face scenes, um, which is I mean, that was the hallmark of German expressionism. It's right there in the
Yep.
name, expressions, like, it's
Yes.
focusing on these intense movements of the face and, what like, the distortions of the human features, and, so I really appreciated that he found a way that felt modern to work that in, like, it didn't feel outside of the world of what they were doing with it, but I definitely, like, saw it and was like, "Yeah, game recognizes game, good work." Um
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, I feel like that's part of why his style is such a good match for this because, like,
Mhm.
especially while I was watching, like, The Lighthouse too, there's a lot of, like, these extended kind of face journeys, I would
Yeah.
say,
Well, and he's
which
not afraid to make a slow movie, which
yes.
I think in 2024, in the world of, like, TikTok, is brave.
Mhm.
I think it's amazing to 'cause I'm sorry, you can't do a fast-paced Dracula adaptation,
No.
and you shouldn't. It's Gothic literature. It's meant to
Yes.
feel endless and uncomfortable and long and daunting, and he committed all the way to that bit, and I really appreciated it. Um, and for those who are online saying, "It was too long," you're the
You're incorrect.
people who are hating on Crimson Peak, and I don't like you.
Yeah, yeah. It's like yeah, at a certain point, I'm like, if you gothic horror is its own thing,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
you
like,
don't have to like gothic horror, but you can't go to a gothic horror movie and then be like, "Too
it was
gothic." And it's
it wa
like, no,
it was
that's how
it was slow, and there were too many castles and monsters.
this is a feature, not a bug,
There
as
were
you would
there's a
say.
feature, not you're UXing the Gothic.
Yes.
Yeah, it's well, yeah, and, like, I don't I just I'm so again, I'm so confused by the commitment to misunderstanding what was happening here, but that's a problem for me on my own time. Uh, I
Yes.
I I loved I loved seeing I was trying to remember because I didn't get to see Crimson Peak in theaters,
Ah,
and so I
oh,
was trying to think like, "Man, have I ever gotten the privilege of having a first time viewing of, like, a Gothic masterpiece on a big screen?" And
mhm.
I don't know that I had, and
Yeah.
I was so incredibly moved. It was actually very funny. I saw this with my 2 friends who I went to theater school with,
Mm,
and there
good
are
group.
times right, I'm like, there are times that you don't wanna be around theater people, but then there are certain things that you do want to be with
Yes.
theater people, and this was one of those things. And so we saw it in my local theater, and it was a matinee, so we saw it in the small theater. It was probably only 40 seats. And the movie ends, the credits start rolling, and everybody else in the theater immediately stands up and walks out during the credits. And me and my 2 friends are sitting in the front row, dead silent for three
Yes.
and a half minutes, just staring at the screen until one of my friends looks across at me and just goes, "Oh my god." And I was like, "Oh my god." And then we just word vomited for 20 minutes. Um, and I just don't know how anyone walked out of that theater not having that reaction. It feels I'm like, "How am I crazy? Am I the
Right,
one?"
I know, I know. I was just I felt, like, wrapped through it.
Yes.
Like, I was just, like, letting it wash over me and was
Mhm.
just like, "Yes, this is what I want." And just it's like, I feel like a lot of times people who are not used to theater, definitely. I think being into theater gives you a lot of experience with this.
Yeah, I've
Or
sat through August Osage County,
no, okay.
okay? I've I've
Uh,
I've sat through 3 hours of street scene.
I
Like,
know. So you gotta. It's like it's long, it's extended, and also um a piece of media doesn't have to make you feel good for it to be good. Like
yes.
there
Again, back to Gothic literature. It's like we're gonna
exactly.
be dealing with complex, uncomfortable themes. That's part of the thing.
I feel like that is something that is true throughout Egger's work. Is it
Mhm.
something that makes me feel dread and feel anxiety in a enjoyable way? Like it
Yes.
is what I want to experience sitting in this, and that is kind of part of it, and that's not something that you get when you're watching a rom-com or a superhero movie, which I also
Or
enjoy watching,
yeah,
but
or
they're
most
different
modern horror,
experiences.
to be honest.
Yeah.
I mean, like, I saw a lot of people saying, like, "Well, it wasn't scary." I'm like, it's not supposed like you said, it's dread. It's
Yes.
unease. It's not supposed to jump scare you. And I did have a conversation with somebody who said one of their main complaints was that there were a couple jump scares in the
Mhm.
movie. Um, but and I don't know if this I was gonna say I don't know if this is on purpose, but everything Robert Eggers does is on purpose.
Yeah.
So
Fair
the
to assume it's on purpose.
yeah, the 2 to 3 moments that were like quote jump scares, specifically like I was thinking about when Thomas pushes the lid off the coffin.
Yes.
In 1922, that scene was a jump scare. The way that it
Yes.
was filmed was like and that was a jump scare for that audience. So I felt like he translated that into now what would that feel like for a modern audience to have that same experience that the audience had in 1922. um
Yeah, and
so
I
I didn't
feel
mind
like
it.
I didn't mind it either, and especially because the other thing I think of is, like, in the very intro, there's kind of that
Hmm.
jump scare scene with, like, Ellen's kind of flashback
Right.
slash revision of whatever, but, like, it's used in a way not to be like, "Ooh, I startled you, didn't I?" But to be like, "Now I am off kilter, now I am experiencing this kind of, like, unsureness of where I sit that provides that sense of dread that extends throughout the
Yeah.
film." So I also did not have a problem with having a couple of like more quote modern style, like gory, scary moments.
Yeah. Well, and when we get into what a lot of vampire stories are about at their core, I think that moment in the very beginning is so important because I mean, obviously there's just the predatory aspect of like Ellen is a child at that point.
Hmm.
But also, so much of this is butted up with like shame in having sexuality as a woman, shame in
Hmm.
having anger as a woman, shame of having like any kind of quote negative or shameful thing as a woman. Um, and it's kind of reflected back at her in this foil, this vampire, and that's through the history of vampire media. It's like
Yes.
vampires represent the darkness within ourselves that we're not able to acknowledge. And so having that butted up in that scene with kind of, you know, what seems to be her kind of having like almost a moment of pleasure and then jolted into this horror
Hmm.
and this like fear is so important to set the tone for the rest of the movie. Like
Hmm.
it's again, it's what the whole movie's about.
Right. It's like that's what it's
That's
about.
the point.
All right.
But
Do you have other thoughts? I feel like I've kind of it, I feel like we could talk about this forever.
right, I know. I'm like, is there anything like
But
major
are
that
there
we've
must
missed?
I feel like I've talked about kind of like my must have item.
Yeah.
Oh, the one thing that I have that I did not tell is someone in so in it was the article about the witch, I think, actually. So this is going all
Mhm.
the way back, that the interviewer asked Eggers why his films are set in the past, And
Oh, yes, I saw this interview.
yes. And because I was like, as we said in the beginning, he's just like me. He was like, I've got a pretentious ass quote for you
Yeah.
about why this is. And so he quoted John Dryden, a poet who said from the 17th century, who says, "For mankind is ever the same, and nothing is lost out of nature, though everything is altered." And I think that that is so true to what we're talking about here, that seeing these instances of the past really shows us how it reflects on ourselves. Like it's a mirror in which you interpret your modern, sense. And just this
Mhm.
idea that people have always been people throughout history. People have always wanted things. They have always felt shame about things. They have always, been mixed up about sexuality and what they need and how to deal with traumatic experiences. And you can kind of sometimes by moving it into the past, you get a clearer picture of
Yeah, it's like
what
can't
it
see the
is.
forest for the trees. Like
Mhm.
if you remove it from present day, it's easier sometimes to like see the full picture when it's not
Totally.
directly related to you. I thought you were going to talk about when he they were like, "Would you ever do a modern picture?" And he was like, "Hell no. The idea of like shooting a car or a cell phone on camera makes me want to kill myself." I was
That's
like,
also great.
"You better work, Robert. You better tell him exactly how it is."
That's true.
Well, that's Nosferatu, baby. Um, I hope that you all enjoyed this film because it immediately went into my top 5. I can't wait to I hope I get to see it again in theaters before it leaves.
Yeah.
And I will immediately Robert Eggers did also say that there will be an extended cut of the movie on the
Yeah.
physical DVD copy when it comes out, so I will definitely be adding that to my collection as
I know.
well.
As soon as you were like, people are like, it's too long, and I'm like,
Make it
joke's on you,
longer!
bitch. It's not long enough. Make it longer.
Oh, I could have sat and watched another hour and a half at least.
It was so good.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
good.
anyway,
Highly
don't
recommend.
speak to us if you don't like it.
Only if you don't like it for an appropriate and ghoul approved reason.
Yeah, that fine.
Fun, I guess. All right, but thank you all for hanging out and listening to us gab about Nosferatu. This feels like the perfect way to start the new year.
Yes, yeah, happy New
And
Year, guys.
Happy New Year. Welcome to our first episode of 2025. If you enjoyed this or any of our episodes, you can go ahead and leave us a review wherever you listen to the podcast. That helps us out a lot. And I do believe that our totally non-begging for reviews has paid off, and
It
we have some
worked.
hot, fresh reviews to read today.
We do, and we've got some fun ones as well. So, this is a 5-star review from Day Tripper Jenny titled, "My dog loves this podcast."
Strong start.
Strong start. My hyper ADHD border collie Cosmo runs to my phone whenever I turn on this podcast. The intro music gets him hyped, and when the talking begins, he chills out. I've been listening to Ghouls Night In for a few months now, and this is my new favorite podcast. I love all things spooky, and the ladies make the topics fun. Thanks,
Oh,
Jenny.
thanks, Jenny and Cosmo.
And Cosmo.
You're a
Shout out to
good boy,
Cosmo.
Cosmo.
You're very good. We're going to play the music again soon. Get excited.
And if you would like to follow along with us, you can find the podcast on Instagram at Ghouls Night In Pod. And if you are looking for me, you can find me at Penny Snark.
And you can find me all over the web at Midge Munster.
And until next time,
Goodbye.
goodbye.